peace deals, and the shifting sands of West Asia. And I would like to invite Mr. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor of the United States, to open this session from New York.
He was the National Security Advisor to former U.S. President Donald Trump between 2018 and 19, and has served as the interim U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Please welcome our keynote speaker for this session, John Bolton.
Well, thank you very much for being invited to speak to the conference, even if only virtually. It's obviously a very, very timely subject to look at the Middle East, West Asia, as you might call it, because a lot has happened in the past few years, and I think there's every prospect for a lot more happening. Some of it good, some of it very, very dangerous indeed. I think, of course, the most recent headline is the recognition of Israel and the exchange of full diplomatic relations by two key players in the region, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. What is it that has brought this about? I certainly don't underestimate the amount of diplomatic effort that was required, and it's a significant achievement. But I think it's important to understand these recognitions as a reflection of the shifting geostrategic tectonic plates of the region. It's a reflection, not a cause, of these changes. And what is the rationale for that change? I think the appreciation that between the Gulf Arab states and Israel and others, that the main threat to regional peace and security is not Israel, it's Iran. And their perception of that threat has triggered not just the formal diplomatic exchange, but an intensification of political and military and intelligence cooperation. So this is a growing, and I think it will be a continuing and expanding amount of cooperation. But also, and I think this is important for the Gulf Arab states, the potential for stability that will bring outside foreign investment into their region as well, no longer just being a place where sovereign wealth funds invest around the world, but where more and more resources will be applied to the Gulf states themselves. Obviously, the big unspoken subject here is the future of oil, its continued use for transportation and many other uses, but also whether the oil resources and natural gas can be used for other things in chemicals and plastics to provide continuing supply of revenue for the states that have these resources, but to guard against the possibility that oil revenues will fall and not be replaced. They want to generate other economic activity. This is also important to understand that other outside powers, I think, will be playing a larger role in the region. But other countries, I think, have begun to play a more important role, and they could roil the waters in the Middle East to a significant extent. Russia's already doing that. It's over the past several years enhanced its position in Syria. It's a principal player in the surrogate civil war inside Libya. China, obviously, is a consumer of energy, sees the Middle East as a source for petroleum that it needs. I think this is a worrying aspect for the countries of Southeast Asia and India as China tries to continually expand in its efforts to achieve hegemony, certainly in East Asia and I think beyond that as well. And Turkey, conceitedly a regional country, but a country that's changed its policies substantially under Recep Erdogan, pursuing what I can only call neo-Ottomanist impulses in the region, certainly in Syria and other places. It's behaved in a way contrary to what I think its NATO obligations are. I am hoping that the 2023 presidential election in Turkey shows the people reflecting they don't want to follow the path Erdogan is on. So there are a lot of factors working in West Asia, some of them optimistic, some of them much more concerning. This is a subject that we could all talk about for days. I'm sorry I'm limited to this brief survey, and I'm particularly sorry I'm not with you, but look forward to further conversations more in person when the days of the coronavirus are over. Thank you again for inviting me.
Those who are with us today and those who will join us tomorrow, I say, Assalamu alaikum.
A new beginning in West Asia. 4 countries picked peace over past discord. 4 countries signed peace deals with Israel: the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, the Sudan, and Morocco. The sands of West Asia are shifting. How will they impact global power equations? How is West Asia shaping geopolitics through peace? Joining us for this session, Mustapha Noman, former Deputy Foreign Minister of Yemen. Jason D. Greenblatt, former Middle East Envoy of the White House and a Chief Architect of peace plan between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Ibrahim Shukralla, Emirati editor from Abu Dhabi. Fleur Hassan Nahoum, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Moderating this session is Palki Sharma Upadhyay, Executive Editor of WION.
It's very good to have all of you with us today. Let me start with Jason Greenblatt. And I'm sure you've been asked this question, but not by me, so I'm going to ask you today. 2 real estate developers and 1 lawyer got together and delivered what no other US president could. Peace deals in West Asia. How did you pull this off?
Well, first of all, thanks for hosting me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and credit to WION. Each of those scenes you just saw are indelibly etched in my memory. And the remarks by India's ambassador, where he said, Namaste, Salam Alaikum, and Boker Tov, are the results of all that effort. So what we did was build on the success and the work of others in the past, but we looked at things a lot differently. We decided to move away from phrases like the 2-state solution, which means different things to different people, phrases like a just solution for that or some solution for this, and re-educate people about the conflict. And I think with the strong leadership, President Trump, His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Bibi Netanyahu, the King of Bahrain and Morocco, and we realized that after all of these discussions, people were tired of the conflict, wanted to move on, wanted to express and support their own people's future, and the results speak for themselves.
People all over the world, I think, are tired of conflicts, but conflicts continue to brew because there is no political will to end them. To that extent, what do you think Donald Trump and his team, including you, did differently from the previous leaders?
Well, first of all, we spoke openly and honestly, and there was no leader who wanted us to speak otherwise. When we started, we were very clear with the leadership in the region. Do you want us to just speak around the issues, or do you want to speak directly to the issues? And while some in this audience, I'm not sure, may not appreciate Donald Trump's tweets or his manner of speaking, they understood that speaking directly is the key to solving issues. And we raised the tough issues. We basically ripped the Band-Aid over the wounds. We exposed the wound. We tried to clean out the wound. And we were able to make progress when everybody realized that many of the issues they agreed on. It doesn't mean we resolved everything. Obviously, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is still brewing. It may brew for a very long time. It may not be ripe yet for solving. But what we did prove is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Israeli-Arab conflict, though intricately tied together, can indeed be separately solved. And that's essential for this region, given all the other conflicts around the world, the instability. Of course, we didn't know about COVID at the time, but it only helps with the COVID situation that some of this conflict is now quiet and will lead to a better future.
Mustapha, Noman, Donald Trump, and this is an understatement, was among the most unconventional presidents that America has seen, and this was arguably his biggest foreign policy win. Did it come as a surprise to you, or do you believe that the region and the political leaders of all of these countries were anyway prepared, and who was in the White House was incidental more than instrumental?
Look, I might be not very optimistic, okay? And my belief is that although these agreements are a very important step towards a better future, a more secure future, but we have also to recognize and admit that unless the grievances of the people in Palestine are solved justly, I think any agreement that will happen in the future will also not be reflected on the ground. Having said that, these agreements between, or the Abraham's Accords are, as I said, are very important and they are pivotal. Maybe this will help alleviate the suffering of those who are not included in this, and I mean the Palestinians. And the issue will always be there unless we tackle the matter, unless we really work hard towards a two-state solution. Everything will be always theoretical, and it will be nice in the media, and people might seem happy, but deep inside, the majority in the Arab world will always look at it in a negative way.
Ibrahim, Shukralla, do you agree with this assessment? And we have seen, and it's not just Israel and Palestine, we've seen in Afghanistan recently, a peace deal does not always translate into peace, but it's definitely a start, and you have to start somewhere.
Well, I think it's going to definitely boost the chances, and it's providing more diplomatic tools, more policy options. We're talking about a fresh dialogue now. So we have all these things on a negotiating table that will not exist before. And this is what the UAE has been, saying from after the Accords. And I totally agree with that, because if we're going to use the old methods with an old mentality, which it always failed. So how would this gain progress if you're going to use the same thing, every single time? I think the Abraham Accords was a historic event, and obviously the UAE and obviously Palestine will always be cornerstone of the UAE's foreign policy, and I'm sure most of the foreign policy of most of the Arab states. And I see the profitability of the Abraham Accords for all of the countries that normalize ties with Israel.
Fleur, Hassan, Nahoum is with us. The question I want to ask you is, and welcome to the summit, what has this accord, what have these peace deals meant for the people of Israel, and how has it changed their perception of the region?
Well, it's wonderful to be with all of you, and I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I really tried to, but traveling these days is very challenging. I'm here in Jerusalem, and I'm very happy to be in your conference virtually. So for Israel and Israelis, this has changed everything. For years, all we really wanted was to be accepted as a regional partner in the region. And although we have deals with Jordan and Egypt, of course, that brought regional stabilization, it never really trickled down to people in terms of tourism, in terms of peer-to-peer, in terms of businesses. It basically stayed at the top. And so this, for Israelis, is a completely different peace. But ultimately, it's a peace that has been achieved from people to people. And this is where our platform that we created, the UAE Israel Business Council, really became useful, because we provided the infrastructure for regular people to be able to talk to each other and do business to each other and reach out to each other. And what we've seen is that people have embraced this peace.
Do you believe that Joe Biden and his team will continue the momentum?
We heard from their declarations from day one. I mean, they will. I mean, they have commended the accords. They have supported them. I'm not saying here that I'm against them. I'm saying that unless they are reflected on the main issue that concerns every Arab about Palestine, they will all. I mean, the problem will be sustained. It will go with us from generation to generation. Yes, Joe Biden will work on it. Now, I think there will be a thorny issue about what the Biden's administration will be facing is about dealing with the issue of Jerusalem. Would they keep or make the embassy in Jerusalem as a functioning embassy for the United States, as Donald Trump and has done? That will be something that we should see, that we should follow. And again, I say that these accords are pivotal and they are very important. But again, they must be reflected on the peace in Palestine between the Palestinians and the Israelis. This is an issue that has been suffering every Arab for the last maybe 80 years or more. And it will always be there again. And I will put more responsibility on the Israeli side, because they are more powerful, they have more force, they can enforce whatever agreements that are just between them and the Palestinian Authority.
Fleur, Hassan, Nahoum, would you like to respond to this? The onus of ensuring this normalization lies more on Israel than any other party.
We're looking at a context of almost 100-year conflict where Israel has, on more than one occasion, offered a solution, on more than one occasion offered a peace deal. And it's been Palestinian rejectionism that has gotten us to the point where we've gotten. It's not that Israel has been the rejectionist partner, it's that the Palestinian Authority, who currently represents the Palestinian people, if you can say that, have been rejecting offer after offer after offer. And what the Abraham Accords came and said, if we're not going to let Palestinian rejectionism define the Middle East.
I have to say, your optimism is infectious.
May I
yes,
add to...
I wanted to. Yes, I did want to ask you if you believe and you agree with the assertion that key stakeholders, i.e., the Palestinians, were not on board when the accords were signed.
The idea that the Palestinian issue, which is important and Palestinians should have better lives and hopefully the type of state that we described in our peace plan that President Trump unveiled in January of 2020. The idea that it's the core conflict of the region may have been true decades ago. It's no longer true. I'm worried about Iran. I'm worried about missiles being fired by Houthi terrorists at Saudi Arabia. I'm worried about the suffering in Yemen, the suffering and the tragedy of the Syria war, the civil war. Lebanon, nobody even speaks about Lebanon anymore. Those are the things that I think the Arab world should also have very, very high on their radar. And it's not to leave the Palestinians behind. But the Palestinian leadership is terribly divided. You have Hamas. I don't know that Hamas will ever change its ways, and if Hamas never changes its ways, there'll never be peace. If there is a Palestinian election, I hope there will be, and they figure out how to get unified under one leadership, and then they show the world that they're willing to engage in good faith with Israel, I know that Israel will engage in good faith with them. But we came to the conclusion that the Palestinian leadership was not only divided, but unwilling to negotiate in good faith, and we also came to the conclusion that the rest of the region simply can't wait for the Palestinians in order to make progress for their own citizens.
Joe Biden is now actively pursuing talks with the Iranians. Where does that leave the Arabs? Although the Biden administration's efforts are not going quite as per plan, I believe. But where does this leave the rest of the effort?
I always say that the Iranians have not shown their willingness to be a peaceful government. I would not say peaceful country, a peaceful government. We know their interventions. We see them in Yemen, we see them in Syria, we see them in Iraq, we see them in Lebanon. So it's all over the place. Now, the problem that will face Joe Biden would be how to tackle this issue about the balance between fulfilling the clauses of the agreement, the implementation from all sides, and at the same time, how to put a halt or a stop and make sure that the Iranians will not use the lifting of the sanctions that have been imposed before the first agreement and during the Trump's administration.
Ibrahim, Shukralla, it's always difficult to answer the question who should be on the talking table, and this is very complex. So the Arabs and the Israelis, for the benefit of our viewers, found a common enemy in Iran, but the Palestinians, or some of the leaders, were not on board. Now, not all Arabs have also signed a peace accord with Israel, and we have a different administration in Washington, D.C. that wants to talk to all sides. Where does this leave the future of the peace deals?
Well, I think there are two things. There is the GCPOA and there is the potential annexation plans. So one is for the Iran and the other is for Palestine. I think when it comes to the GCPOA, the Gulf Arab states, they want to be involved because it's also pertaining their security. And they felt after, during Obama era, they felt that they were just spectators. And they want to be involved, and I think a new deal should really address the ballistic missile program, proxy wars, sponsoring terrorism, and obviously nuclear proliferation. So when it comes to the annexation plans, I think if there is a really desire for peace by the Biden administration and the Israelis, then resuming annexation plans would really obstruct any peace in the future. And the UAE, I think, and other Arab states that normalized ties with Israel were clear from the beginning that, suspension of annexation would be really positive, and it's a progress. And we hope that, and I personally hope that the Israelis would not resume or would not go ahead with the annexation plans.
Mustapha, Noman, I want to take it from where, the point that she mentioned, the only parties that opposed the Abraham Accords in the Knesset were the Arab parties. And you're a politician, and you would appreciate this more than most people, that sometimes conflicts become the raison d'etre for some political leaders and parties, and they end up becoming impediments to resolutions. Do you believe that that might be the case with some sections in Palestine, if not all?
I agree with you, Jason, that the Palestinian leadership has not been positive, and I might even add they were corrupt, and the Palestinian cause was taken hostage in their hands, and they were consuming it for their own personal interest, for being leaders forever. And we see the ages of all these leaders. They are so old, they have been there and they don't want even to leave it for the new generation that might have a different view, that might have a different perspective to the whole problem. And I agree with that. But at the same time, I say that because Israel has a more powerful stature in that geographical location, they have more responsibility. They can alleviate the grievances of the people, and then you will see the real positive impact in the Arab world.
I'm taking closing comments. Yes, please.
I think the difference in our opinion is that while you support the idea of peace and the Abraham Accords, is you try to relink the conflicts. And our position is, or at least my position, is yes, the Palestinian issue must be resolved. Yes, we want better lives and something that they can build, that they could be proud of. But that is a separate discussion from solving all the other problems. We want to fix Yemen. To the extent there's a link with other things, we'll try to work on those too, but we want to fix Yemen. We want to fix the Palestinian issue. We want to fix Syria. We shouldn't link these issues together. The other place we disagree is blaming Israel because they're more powerful. It isn't that Israel's more powerful, therefore has more responsibility. We have to demand responsibility out of the Palestinian leadership. That doesn't mean Israel doesn't have responsibilities too, but in all of my discussions with so many diplomats from this region, I often get it's Israel's fault and silence as to Palestinian responsibility. And our position is, again, my position is, let's demand responsible leadership out of the Palestinians, and then we'll talk about responsibility of everybody else and how everybody else can help.
Right. Fleur, I know this is supposed to be about constructive conversation, but I'm a journalist. I'll also always look for headlines. And your country has just had an election. We're waiting for the winner to be announced. In the meantime, perhaps you can tell us which is the next country Israel is signing a peace deal with.
Well, I wish I knew. Look, there's a lot of talk about different countries, of course. I would guesstimate that looking in the direction of Oman, who have also a young leader who's just come in, who is interested in peace and normalization with Israel. So I would venture to suggest that that's perhaps the next direction. There's been incredible overtures and kind of under the radar collaboration and normalization with Indonesia, which is, of course, the largest Muslim population in the world. And that, I think, to me, is extremely exciting.
And when you say that the only way forward is peace and coexistence, I think you speak for all of us. And I think that's a good note to end this session on. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.